Fedora is the best distribution. I know, like, it's hard to make those sorts of claims because it's like, well, that's subjective. What's the best for you might not be the best for me. And I'm going to say you're wrong, because Fedora is the best distribution for everyone. And the reason for that is, okay, let's take a look at the main three, like, foundational distributions that you're going to run into. There are more than that, but like these are the main three. There's distributions based on Debian, and that includes Ubuntu and all of its kind of like forks. There's distributions based on Arch, and that includes any Arch-based distribution and forks thereof. And there's distributions based on Fedora. And like, of course, there's distributions based on Gentoo and distributions based on Void Linux. Actually, I'm not even sure if there's any forks of Void Linux, but it is its own distribution. It's not a subsidiary or a fork of another distribution. The main differentiating factors between all of these distributions is a couple, right? The biggest one is going to be the package manager. Some smaller ones that have a large impact, though, is kind of like the philosophical approach to Linux. A distribution like Debian, for example, doesn't really have good support for proprietary softwares. And so everything on Debian should be, by design, free and open source. Arch takes a different philosophy. Actually, backing it up to Debian. Debian is also hyper stable, right? They don't have these landmark releases coming out every month or every 3 months. I mean, I think it's like every 5 years or 2 years or something like that. It's been a while since I've looked into it. But it's really stable, which makes it awesome for something like a server, but not so much for something like a desktop. Arch takes a different approach to that. Arch is what we would refer to as the bleeding edge. You install Arch Linux one time, and then you just update it. It also has a different package manager from Debian. But I would say that the biggest difference between the two distributions is that rolling release model and a stable release model. And so on rolling release, like I said, you install it once, and that's it. You just continually update. And it's nice if you need like cutting edge driver support. It's nice if you need cutting edge software support or bleeding edge software support. But it does come with its own host of instabilities when dependencies run into each other, conflict with each other, or even worse, when something doesn't get properly vetted by the team over at Arch, and then you update your system, and then you boot it into just a blinking cursor, which is what happened to me a couple weeks ago. And then there's Fedora, which kind of like rides that middle line. Fedora is what I think some people refer to as the cutting edge, so not quite as stable as Debian or Ubuntu, but not as rolling and bleeding edge as Arch. And so it strikes a balance, man. I think they have the formula cracked, because when I installed Fedora, I hate to say it, everything worked, which is fantastic when you're trying to get work done. But it's also a simple and vanilla distribution. It ships with GNOME. You guys can see it on my desktop here. It ships GNOME by default, no extensions except for one that has like their little brand down here in the corner, probably underneath my picture. But aside from that, it's just the vanilla experience. Now, on my desktop, I have installed a few extensions. You can see them here. Well, I did install Blur My Shell, but it's off. I don't need that. I installed Dash to Dock, but it's off. I don't need that. And Transparent Top Bar, also off. And so the built-in ones here that you can just, toggle at your convenience, the only one really that they leave on is background logo. And then the two I have installed, Alphabetical App Grid and Hot Edge. This essentially just turns it into a vanilla experience, but I do like having my app grid alphabetized, and I like being able to trigger the activities overview instead of coming up to the hot corner over here, is just pulling it up right there. And Vanilla GNOME, as I've discussed in other videos, is great. And so Fedora ships with Vanilla GNOME, but they have a lot of different spins. If you want to run Budgie, I think they're trying to get support for that. Support for KDE, Cinnamon, i3, a whole bunch of them. And like you can, let's just take a look at that. Where is that? Here we go. If you want to look at what they offer, here's what they offer. KDE Plasma, XFCE, LXQT, Mate, Cinnamon, LXDE, SOAS, I'm not even familiar with that one, and i3. So they offer a bunch of different ones, and they all ship relatively vanilla. And so I can hear you asking, well, you know, Fedora sounds nice. It is great support out of the box, but God, I hate GNOME, or God, I hate the bloat. Number one, bloat is such a nebulous concept. I mean, a desktop environment for some people is bloat. I mean, depending on your line of work, a window manager is bloat. And so I always encourage people, you know, when they talk about bloat, I don't encourage them, I challenge them, like, what is bloat that you want to get rid of your system? Because when I was doing Arch, and the main reason I did Arch really was because of the bloat issue. And so when I was doing Arch, you know, I liked it. I installed bare bones. I changed root to install like my desktop environment and all these little applets and everything. Like, I liked having that sort of control. But what I found myself doing is just installing pretty much everything that would ship in a vanilla system. Like, I need a Bluetooth controller. I just have to connect my Bluetooth mouse. So that's like a non-negotiable. I have to install that. I have to install Network Manager. I have to install Xorg. I have to install Wayland. I have to install Pulse or Pipewire. I have to install display managers. I have to install, what is it called? Display Manager. I have to install some sort of power management, fan management. Like, I installed all that stuff. And it's like, well, you know, that's the stuff that would ostensibly be considered bloat, but here it is on my system anyway, because it turns out I need it to have a functioning desktop. And what I learned was what I considered bloat really wasn't all that stuff. It was just like little things that shipped with my desktop environment that I wouldn't really use, like this cheese app. I don't use that. This calendar app, don't really use that. Help, like whatever that is, I don't really use that. Photos, I don't really use that. But everything else, I mean, look at this. Look at this system. This is a pretty bare bones system. I would challenge most people in their day-to-day, except for Diablo, I would challenge most people in their day-to-day to have a system that is more stripped down than this, unless you're like a really, really big tech enthusiast, or you are running like some sort of window manager because you're in IT, or you just like running window managers because, you know, it triggers some sort of dopamine response in your brain, which is what I really think is going on with Arch Linux users. And I'm saying this as an Arch Linux user of probably like 15 months, is the real reason I was on Arch, if I'm being honest with myself, is to say that I was running Arch. And it reminds me of like the IQ distribution bell curve, where on one end you have like the Neanderthal guy, and he's like, Fedora is great because it just works. And then in the middle, you have like this brainlet guy, and he's like crying, and he's just like, yeah, but Arch Linux, you know, it has all these features, and it doesn't have bloat in Arch Linux, and he's just like crying. And then on the super intelligent side, it's like, yeah, you know, I like Fedora because it just works. And that's kind of what I feel like right now. Like, I was just that crying brainlet guy because I wanted to use Arch because it was inaccessible, right? It was behind this garden of knowledge, and I just like, if I want to know Linux, I need to learn Arch. And so I started pouring through the wiki and just, yeah, I need to do Arch. I need to install Arch so I can walk into Reddit and say, I do Arch, damn it, while I'm begging people to help me figure out where I broke my Arch installation. And so, yeah, I don't really regret it because, you know, knowing Arch does teach you a lot about Linux, but at the end of the day, your computer is a tool, and from my perspective, you should be using that tool to get work done, right? Like, that's the whole point of having a computer. And I think for a lot of Arch users, it's not really a tool to get work done. It's more analogous to like a hot rod. It's something you want to customize and tweak and min-max and get hyper performance. And, you know, I only want to use 350 megabytes of RAM on my 32 gigabyte RAM machine. It's just like it fulfills a different purpose that I enjoyed in the moment, but I don't think is super necessary. And so Fedora, again, to kind of just recap this, Fedora strikes that really good balance of like a stable thing that just works. I don't have to sit there and babysit it like I did on Arch, but it does come with the most up-to-date packages. The release model is really, really quick paced. I think it's like every 6 months they have a new major release. Their support is great. Their documentation is great. Their package manager is absolute garbage. I hate DNF, but you know what? It is what it is. You kind of have to suffer through some of the slog. But it's not quite as weighted down and heavy as Debian or Ubuntu tends to be. And so I think it's a solid balance. And you know, if it's good enough for Linus Torvalds, I don't know why it wouldn't be good enough for me or for you. So if you're on Arch or another distribution, I would highly recommend checking out Fedora. It has been an absolute dreamboat. I love using it. I know that's not really unfashionable right now to say, but it is true. I think Fedora is a really, really good distribution. And you know, if you're in the market to distro hop, check it out. You can try out one of the other desktop environment spins, but you know, just give it a shot and see what you like. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.